to cloud.
Then you need to give me access again.
Yeah, and I'm making you the host again. Okay, well, for Richard's benefit, TUANZ have recently joined as one of our sponsors for the awards, and we've had a long relationship with them, and we're delighted to have Craig come and talk to us about what's happening in the kind of technology and rural sector. So I'll hand over to you, Craig, and you can do all of the formality.
Oh yeah, thanks, Sarah. Kia ora, everyone.
You're welcome.
And good to be here. And I think it's going to be a conversation between me and Richard, which is quite common, actually. We've talked over the years. Yeah. So I have, so I'm, for people who are listening to the recording, I'm the CEO of TUANZ, the Technology Users Association. So, yep, we have changed the T from telecommunications to tech, and made several changes, but it's critical. Connectivity in rural New Zealand is still incredibly important. So today, what I thought I'd do is go through, it's a bit of a brain dump, and kia ora Lee, a bit of a brain dump on things that are top of mind in that space at the moment, and some of the things you'll have heard before and you'll know are happening, but it's nice to do a little bit of a catch up and summary of where things are at. And it actually helped me too, sort of think about how things were going. So I'm going to share my screen because I've done some slides. More than anything, they help me figure out what I'm going to say and when I'm going to say it. And because there's only a few of us, Richard and Lee, if you've got any questions as we go, just simply ask them. Or have you got any views? Because I'm also interested to hear from you around what's going down for you.
Okay. Yep. No, good.
So, all right. So what I'm going to talk about, as I said, it's a brain dump. And the reason why I want to talk about connectivity, because you can't do anything with technology in New Zealand unless you're connected. And even though we've changed ourselves to the Technology Users Association, our core and our history is all about advocating for equity of connection, equity of connectivity, and we've still got that in our strategy. So I want to talk about the RCG rollout, where I see that getting up to at the moment and what I see happening there. Connected Marae very quickly, because I think it's a really important program, what the latest CIP monies have gone to, the role of satellites, which is certainly popping up over the last couple of days, and some current issues top of mind for rural people. And Lee, you might see some slides there that look vaguely familiar to some that Andrew Hoggard has done. And because I'm the host, I'm getting all the admit buttons. So we'll just keep going. And as people come in, they can join us. So I thought I'd just start with reminding everybody about what is actually happening in the rural space when it comes to connectivity. And at a high level, there are three things going on when it comes to government investment in improving connectivity in rural New Zealand. The first is the RBI, the Rural Broadband Initiative Phase 2, and the extensions that have been given to that. The second is the Mobile Black Spot Program, and the third is the COVID investment. And it's not termed that, but I've just called it that. And I'll give you a heads up on those sorts of things. So I'm just sort of setting the scene at the moment to remind us where we are. I like to think of this as New Zealand's lost pie or lost pie chart. So when you think about investment in connectivity in New Zealand and improving connectivity, there's 85% are going to get this ultra fast stuff, which is basically fibre. So fibre to the home and to the premise, world leading network, world leading outcomes. Don't even think about comparing us to Australia because that's just a mess over there. And every time I had a call last night with the international association that we're part of. And whenever we get on there, they always want to ask us about UFB because, you know, they think about urban. But there was quite a bit of conversation last night, and we'll get back to it. Just as I said, there's a bit of a brain dump today from the character from France, Bernard. I'm just trying to remember his last name, but Bernard was asking about rural, because obviously rural is not an uncommon issue across the board. It's not just New Zealand that has issues with that. So coming back to that, 85% ultra fast, the fastish the 12% of rural New Zealand that get sort of fastish broadband. I don't want to call it fast. So that's wireless ISPs, that is the RCG, that is RBI1. It's a whole mixture. It's upgraded copper, but I think we just call it the fastish. And then I've called it the lost 3%, which is that last group that we're all struggling to figure out how to solve the issues for those. And there's probably a slice in there, it'd be less than 1% of, you'd call them the I don't know what you call them, the wild don't want to have it sort of thing. So there is a very small slice of people who don't want to have it. And I'm more than happy for people to have these slides afterwards, by the way. Just, yeah. So let's talk about the RCG. Oh, this is really interesting. The Rural Connectivity Group, if you remember correctly, is it's not a joint venture, it's a separate organization owned by the 3 mobile companies. Equally, it's a unique arrangement around the world. It is contracted to deliver over 500 of these new sites, expanding geographic coverage to 62%. Now, remember, you remember these adverts, the mobile companies always talk about where people live, work and play. So they always talk about, you know, we cover 99% of where people live, work and play. Well, that's just a really nice way of saying we don't cover the whole country. we just cover, you know, where we, yeah. So geographic coverage to 62%. It's an increase from about 49, I think, to 62 by the end of 2023. So we've still got a way to go. And it is a unique network model with the RCG owned equally by all 3 operators, which means that the towers, the equipment, everything that's there is owned by the RCG. And the fascinating topic at the moment, and you know, if journalists have asked, particularly 2 days ago, I did an interview with Radio New Zealand, was around Vodafone and Spark looking to sell off their current mobile towers. It doesn't include the RCG towers because the RCG is owned separately. But the conversations that I would be then having with whoever bought the towers is, well, how can you help the RCG roll out further? How are you going to increase co-location on those towers? And because those of us that get out of the main cities, I mean, simply, I'm heading to Hamilton after this, and there are at least 2 locations between here and Hamilton, which you would class as rural, where there are 2 or more mobile towers on a hill, which just to me is a waste of investment. It's like, you know, if a tower is $100,000 to $300,000, there's, you know, probably $1 million sitting there that could have been halved. So I think there's, you know, there's a lot of work that once those towers get sold, then I think there's quite a bit of work to be done around helping that out. Now, they were really slow on their rollout. And this slide here is one I just made up this morning. I just pulled some numbers out. So this time in 2020, there was only about 80 sites live, and they've been working at that for a couple of years, and we were pretty harsh on them, saying that they were just too slow in rolling out their sites. They've picked it up even during COVID. So this time in 2021, there was 230. The end of last year, they've just ticked over 300. And they've got to get to their 500 by the end of next year. So they've got a lot of work to still do. And of course, like any rollout, they always leave the hard ones till last. So we know that there will be an improvement in the coverage. We just think they've taken a long time to pick themselves up. Just coming back to the RCG, there was something else I was going to say about them. Never mind. Oh, yeah, the one thing to remember about the RCG, this is a mobile technology. So they are using mobile networks. So they're providing mobile and they're providing fixed wireless, but it's over the mobile network. So what you get, the downside to that service, as we all know, is that it's a contended service. So the more people you get on those towers, the lower grade service you get. Now, the theory is with the RCG is the areas they're covering are sparsely or low populated, and so therefore they won't hit capacity issues. Good question, Lee. How did they decide where to put the sites? They have, because they're owned by the 3 mobile companies, they've had access to all the network plans from the 3 mobile companies, so they've been able to see where the black spots are and where the gaps are. And then it's a matter of finding the right site, in other words, the right hilltop, and then actually convincing or paying somebody to allow them to put that up there. They also have to think about, can they get fibre to the site? Do they have to backhaul using microwave? There are all sorts of those sorts of issues that go with it as well. Right, so that's the RCG. And look, quite honestly, they're a decent bunch of people. They really want to do the right thing. John Proctor and the people that work for him, they really believe in it, and we just need them to keep going and get it out there. And then, of course, what we really need to do is to make the most of new technology, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Just quickly, connected marae. So this is where the government put a particular chunk of money in through CIP to connect marae. There's 877 eligible marae to be connected. There are 553 connected at the end of the last year. And this is an example of something I want to come back to later, where government loves to chuck a big chunk of money, or they like to make it easy for themselves, and they like to go, I'll give this big pot of money and I want to give it to just one contract. I want to give it to one. So the connected marae are all getting Spark services where they can, because Spark won the contract to deliver connected marae. So no disrespect to Spark, but it's just, again, it comes back to that's the way CIP and government like to do it. One contract makes it easy for them, but doesn't necessarily give the best outcome. When it says 530 with hardware, part of the contract or part of the connection that the marae get is not just the broadband, it's some mesh Wi-Fi, it's also some AV equipment for doing video calling and things like that as well. I think that, look, to me, the whole connected marae, put aside who's delivering the project, etc., this is a huge positive step for rural Maori, and it also, it brings so many other benefits with it, I think, that we don't understand just yet, around the use of tikanga and how they will be able to integrate with their urban whānau. Anyway, so then I want to talk about the latest CIP monies, and I know I've only got 45 minutes, so if I go too quick, just let me know. This little picture is what I call the stale donut, and it entered the vernacular about 2 years ago when I made it up, and I take full ownership of calling it the stale donut. And so whenever if you ever hear that, and I've heard people now using it in government, it came from me, because basically what we had was urban was getting this absolutely fantastic fibre network, 4G. The telcos will roll out 5G in urban, no arguments, they'll do the investment they are. And then we had the RBI2 project with the RCG and the wireless ISPs, 4G technology, the latest technology, and obviously, just when it comes to technology, the way they will be building the 4G network it'll be upgradable to 5G, reasonably simple. But when they had this RBI1 donut, sort of that first rollout that they did, and it was done with 3G technology, and there was lots of argument, and I remember this, I was at Chorus at the time, almost having arguments with Vodafone about what their service really was. And this is the Vodafone network. You can't get around it. You've got to say it's the Vodafone RBI1 network. And it was at the beginning of COVID, and then into COVID, it was really struggling. It has capacity issues. It has significant areas where they can't sell new services. It has patches of coverage, areas where it's not covered. So it really was being left behind. And so we talked strongly about this 2 years ago, and then the government decided that with the COVID recovery monies, they would put some money aside to help with the RBI1 stale donut. And it took them 18 months to finally come around to it, but they've finally allocated $47 million up to the end of 2024. And the aim is to boost capacity in that donut area and deload the RBI1 network. And it's a mixture of money going to the incumbents, so Vodafone to improve capacity on the network, and a mixture of WISPs. So I think there's about, the numbers I've seen are between 7 and 11 different organisations that have been given money. So the money that's going to go to the wireless ISPs will allow them to provide services in that RBI1 area and therefore deload the network. But as I say, the money's only just been given. It's only been announced about a month ago. So again, slow to take up. We haven't seen the impact of that yet. What it's all leading to, if you were the Minister of Communications, you'd be saying everything will be solved by the end of 2024, which is actually misnomer, which is not something I think we ought to buy into, and I'll talk about that as well. I want to talk about, as I said, lots of just ideas, and Sarah said it was a briefing, so I didn't have to give you a really, slack presentation. It was just a brain dump. The role of satellites, and this is fascinating. Again, on the call with my colleagues around the world. So TUANZ is part of the International Telecommunication Users Group, or INTUC. It's run out of the Netherlands by BTG, and has members. So last night on the call, there was the Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, France, the UK, Indonesia, ourselves, and Australia. Anywhere where there's a users association. We had quite a discussion last night about what was happening with satellites in the area, in each of our areas. It's becoming a really competitive space. And the reason why it's really important is for that lost 3% that I talked about. And I should have said that 3% is not, you just can't easily go to a map, and you'll know this. You can't go to a map and go, there's the 3%. You can't draw it on the map. You can draw some parts like Milford and Fiordland, but we probably don't want to have coverage down there anyway. But, there are people who can see the Sky Tower in Auckland that have no coverage. There will be people in areas where there's people on the Canterbury Plains where have no coverage from the new RCG tower because of trees and just can't get high enough. So it's a misnomer to sort of go, it's the very remote people. It's actually it's interspersed, and I'll come back to that about what we should do about that. So you've got the incumbents, so the Intelsats, Inmarsats, the Optus satellite, like the people who are providing Sky TV. There is no reason why they couldn't provide broadband off there. It would be pretty slow. The latency would be significant, and you'd get significant rain fade. All the things that came with the original Farmside satellite. Everyone talks about Farmside. Poor old Farmside get this bad name because it's their satellite service. The early satellite services weren't too flash hot. Then you've got these new Ka band networks. So this is companies like Pacific. These satellites are much more focused in the beams that they deliver, and they are still geosynchronous, so they're in the same spot in the sky all the time, but they are significantly better than the older ones, and they've only come online in the last 18 months. And then you've got the flavor of the month, Starlink, the LEO networks, low Earth orbit networks. I've got a mate who lives in Albany. He swears by it, but as soon as he can get fibre, he's getting it. So, you know, so it is a really good service, but it's not as good as if you could get fibre. And I need to be careful because I don't want to be quoted as saying fibre is the answer to everything. But I think the experience you get with fibre is the answer to everything. We can talk about that later. So LEO networks, you've got Starlink, you've got OneWeb, and it's been fascinating to see them develop. And so the LEO networks, I'm sure you know this already, but let's just remind ourselves, these are satellites that are lower in their orbit, and they move. So they're not in the same part of the sky. So you need a network of these. You need a lot more of them. And so let's have a look at Starlink. Starlink have 2,100 of these small satellites already in orbit, and 1,600 of them are active. We're fortunate in New Zealand that we have a row. I call it a road because they fly behind each other, that fly across New Zealand, and they go from south to north. So they're constantly circling the Earth, and they fly over New Zealand. And what you need then is the kit. Your dish has to be powered, because the dish that sits on your property is actually moving, and it's following the satellites. So it moves one satellite as it goes across the sky, and then when it loses that one, it moves back to pick up the next satellite. So and it's incredibly intelligent and really clever technology, but it's probably, when you think about it, something else that could go wrong. And of course, if your power goes off, your satellite goes down, because like most things. But I just wanted to bring you these numbers. So while they've only got 2,000 in orbit, they've got 12,000 of these things that are approved by the FCC already. So they are in the process of launching up to 12,000 of these satellites. And at the end of last year, they applied through the ITU and the Federal Communications Commission in the States. They applied for an extra 30,000 satellites. And you get all the stories, now. When Tonga had the cut on the Southern Cross cable, or their cable, there was all this call for Starlink services to be made available in Tonga. And of course, we're seeing it in the Ukraine, where low Earth orbit satellites are being used significantly to keep communications going in those spaces. So there's a real role for these, but the sky is going to be littered with thousands and thousands of these satellites. So current issues top of mind, and I know I'm running through pretty quick. Here's a Fed slide. Sorry, I stole it from Andrew's presentation last year. So I did pull these out because I thought they were interesting. So the Feds did their annual survey last year and asked their members what they were using. 51% were using wireless broadband, and 65% were in that 0 to 20 megabits per second range, which is why I call that the fast dish. I'm sitting at home. I'm in an urban area. I've got a gig. So how do you compare 20 megs to a gig? It's not the same. 61% can access 4G, and 66% have between 50 and 100% coverage on their farm. And this is where, and my conversations with rural associations are, it's not just about having coverage on part of the farm. It's about coverage where you need it. So it's about coverage at the home. It's about coverage at your farm workers' premises. It's about coverage over the back where you roll off your ATV and you need to ring 111. So, you know, things like that, which you don't think about, which are actually really important and actually quite difficult. And then the landline service, which I'm going to come back to, 69% have the traditional landline and around 50% rated as poor or average. This is Rural Women. They did a survey about the same time, and you can see similar sort of answers. My cell phone coverage at home is, well, mostly there's about 30% say it's good, but not many say it's excellent. And the coverage on the farm, it's even worse. So, you know, patchy at best when it comes to that. And Feds last year, when they presented to us, talked about rural network capacity. So we've talked about that. Voice services in rural areas. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And then the interest around LEO. So in my current conversations with rural groups, these are the ones that are really top of mind right now. The first one is a fear of copper withdrawal. So if you go back to that comment about how many people have a landline, those are all being delivered. The vast majority of those have been delivered over copper, the standard old copper line. And two things have brought this fear about. The first one is that there has been some media commentary about copper being withdrawn. Now, copper under the deeds that are in place between Chorus and the government cannot be withdrawn where there is not an equivalent service to be provided. So in rural New Zealand, there is no equivalent service at this point. So they cannot withdraw copper in rural New Zealand. And in fact, it gets even more complex in that they cannot withdraw a copper service to somebody who had a copper service in 2001. That's what's actually written in the deed. So if a farmhouse has a copper service, it cannot be withdrawn. And in fact, if it breaks down, they must replace it if they've had that service since 2001. The other fear has come because of bad practices on behalf of some retail service providers. And the Commerce Commission has just come out, has been cracking down on this. So this is where someone like I can't say a name, I shouldn't say a name, right? But a mobile company might ring you and say, oh, did you know that copper will be turned off in New Zealand over the next couple of years? You need to change now, and I've sent you a mobile modem. That's not acceptable behaviour. And there are some codes about to be put in place which will, should stop that. So the first thing is copper will not be withdrawn. The second thing, though, is the PSTN withdrawal. This is active. And this is where actually Rural Women and TUANZ have actually written to Chorus and Spark around this topic, asking them to be a lot more transparent around what they're doing, and also we want Spark to follow the same rules as Chorus has to follow about notification. So the PSTN is being turned off. This is your plain old telephone service. This is your voice service that's currently sitting on a copper line. They have a valid reason for turning it off. The equipment is not maintainable anymore. No one's making it. At the moment, they're having to get spares from wherever they can around the world. I've heard of them going to South America to get spares for the network. And so they're replacing that with a VoIP service. And so they aren't taking away the ability to make a voice call, they're changing the technology. Now, there are two things that come with that. First of all, anything over IP, voice over IP or broadband needs power. And so if your power goes off, your landline goes off. if you're over IP. That is an issue. And Spark have committed to working with their customers where they turn the PSTN off and there are electricity issues to assist them with a UPS for the phone. So they're looking to, at the moment, what they're doing is providing a UPS that will provide battery power to the device in the home for 8 hours. 8 hours? 4 hours. Oh, gosh. Better check that. One moment, caller. I've got something on my screen that actually tells me that. See, it's frozen. Anyway, so they are providing a UPS service for those customers who have electricity issues, but it doesn't fully answer it. The second confusing element in this is that Vodafone have decided to withdraw their PSTN services across the board in one go. So they are currently withdrawing those services. And so it is getting a little confusing in the market where if you're in rural and you've got a voice service with Vodafone and they tell you they're turning it off, and they suggest that the early days, they weren't giving you good information about where else you could go. So for example, they might turn off their PSTN service, but you could get it with Spark, for example, or somebody else. They weren't being overly transparent about that. So we've pushed back on them on that as well. And that all comes down to emergency calling. And, you know, when you lose power, you lose the ability to make 111 calls on that landline, which is why the UPS are going in there. So look, this issue, particularly around the PSTN withdrawal, we're working closely. We had a briefing from Spark last week around what they're doing, and as the association, we're just working through that at the moment, and I'm sure that at the symposium coming up, we'll ask them to give us a bit of an update on that as well. So what should we do next? I couldn't miss the opportunity with half a dozen journos or people interested in rural New Zealand to tell you a couple of things about where I think we should be going. So at last year's mini symposium we did, Mike Smith from Whisper talked about the emerging challenges, about it not being coverage. It's actually about capacity. Demand is growing rapidly, and we know that. And there's a potential for the widening of the broadband gap. And the thing that we know about rural New Zealand that a lot of decision makers forget is that rural connectivity is not just about watching Netflix or watching the Rugby World Cup. It's about managing the farm or running your business. It is about productivity. There is so much more that goes with being connected than just entertainment. So these 5 things, and I'm sorry about the words being so small, but these 5 things were what we wrote 2 years ago, and we've been pushing with government, which is a 10-year multilateral plan, you know, actually working out a path that everybody buys into, and that doesn't matter if you get a change of government, we all know where we're going. Secondly, we want government and operators to lock into this idea that our end goal is about the experience being at least equivalent to urban. So forget about talking about speeds. They're a quasi measure for equivalency, but really, you know, rural people need the same as urban people, so they should have the same. That requires a change to the funding model. So rather than what we talked about before, which is government going, here's 47 million, I'm going to give it to one provider, you fix the problem. It's going to be more transactional and more end focused. And so it's got to be about continued investment. It's got to be continued capability and offering enhancements. And I think things like free installs of CPE, rather than expecting the rural dweller to pay for say Starlink, then why, the government could perhaps solve someone's issue by paying for the CPE, which is what the next one is about. Is with the technology we have, with the information that we have now, with the data we have, and with the capability to do, data with data scientists, we should actually be able to work out a publicly available register, allowing end users to actually figure out what the best form of connectivity is, and actually report on that. And that comes back to also, then you can fund that user to get the best service they need. So instead of going, Spark, here's 100 million to build 5 towers, we go, well, John, who is, or Joanna, who is in Waipawa or out of Waipawa, hasn't got coverage. How do we get them the best coverage? And it gets, and we really do need to get down to that level over the next 10 years. And the last thing is, it'll all fail if we don't actually talk about the options and the opportunities that people have. So if we don't rely on people like yourselves to get out there and tell the stories around what can be done, how you can learn, and how you can live in rural New Zealand, and what connectivity means, then it'll fail, because it's really up to people. And then the last thing would, be poor of me not to mention this, particularly since we haven't been able to meet in person to talk about rural connectivity since 2019. We are hosting our annual connectivity symposium, and we're joining with Whisper to make it a joint conference on Tuesday the 14th and Wednesday the 15th of June in Hamilton. And I'm picking that some journalists would quite like to attend that event, and we're more than happy to provide complimentary access to the event, because obviously the whole reason for the symposium is to share knowledge, share stories, and we will write it up and be pushing out the information we gather. So so that's there. And look, that's my brain dump, and I'm sorry, it was a torrent of words that just came out. So anybody got any specific questions they'd like to ask me?
Yeah, Craig, I was thinking what you mentioned about the government trying to target more outcomes rather than one sole provider with a big lump of money. Do you think that's been answered with the latest 47 million tranche that's going out to, I think, Whisper, big recipients of that, aren't they? Is that sort of addressed some of that?
They're getting better at it.
Yeah.
And I think that's more to do with the people that are sitting at CIP, right, our Crown Infrastructure Partners. I think, all credit to them. They've been around, they've listened to us, they've been involved in the Whisper, they've come to the symposium. So yeah, I think they're taking a much better view. So I think they're getting better at it. But I think also it comes back to that comment I made around, actually now we're getting to the point of where you've got to be even more granular.
Yeah. Because remember John Key was talking a few months ago, it might have been before Christmas, about how we should be pushing harder on fibre in rural, wasn't it? And I mean, I think Mike might have said at the time that wasn't necessarily the best approach to take, but I think Whisper can actually install fibre now too if they want. But how much more capacity do you think, though, there is realistically and economically for more rural fibre, Craig?
I think what we'll get to is we'll finish the UFB project now, which will get to 85%.
Yeah.
And the WISPs are already talking about rolling out their own fibre.
Yeah.
And so I think what we'll end up with is it'll become more organic. Yes. So, as something opens up somewhere, and an RCG tower goes in and they ask Chorus for fibre, then what we should be doing actually is putting a requirement on Chorus or any fibre provider that if you build a fibre link to, in a rural environment, you build it such that you can actually provide services to customers along the way.
Yeah.
So that's how I think fibre will build out from now.
Right.
Yeah. Because I think you're right. I mean, it would be amazing if you get fibre to every person in every premise in New Zealand and then allow the user to choose what they want, but they had the choice. But let's be honest, pushing fibre right out is pretty expensive.
Yeah.
It may not be the best use of money. Yeah.
Can I just ask?
Sorry.
Lee, I'm just maybe following on from that a little bit. The idea of improving connectivity right across a farm, isn't that going to require the farm landowner to do a lot of their own investment in their own sort of internal infrastructure? And where would they go for advice, support for that? I mean,
Yeah.
How would you actually set about doing that?
Yeah. Well, I think there's you've picked up on something that really has two answers. The first one is you could provide it with better satellite services. There is a satellite service that was launched 2 years ago, which the mobile companies haven't used, but they could. And I don't think the satellite's been launched yet, but it will enable you to make your mobile phone to actually use the satellite to make the call if it's out of range. So there are technological fixes that may come. So that's the first one. And then the second one, you're right. A farmer or someone who's farming on a farm could invest in improving coverage on their property, and that would require repeaters and things like that. It's another one that's just happened. Vodafone have withdrawn the sale of their shore signal services, which is where you have a mini mobile device, it's not a mobile tower, but it's a cell site. It's not even a cell in your house that you plug into the broadband, and then you get mobile coverage in that area. But they've just withdrawn that. And so no one's selling those in New Zealand now. There is a third-party provider, I think, but it's not as easy. So that's something that could have been really simple. You could have plugged one of those in. You could have put Wi-Fi to the cow shed and plugged in one of those devices, and you would have had mobile coverage. But they've withdrawn the service. So I still think there's lots of gaps. And Lee, your question is really good, and I don't have an answer for it at the moment. Maybe bring that to the Rural Symposium and yeah.
How's the blind spot investment going in the cellular network, Craig? Because wasn't that 150 million put out about 4 years ago? I mean, have they filled all those spots? Or
no, they haven't.
Yeah.
And they are. I was just looking at it today, how far through they've got. They have. Oh, they haven't given the number of. Where's the progress? They're about 70% complete on the state highway black spots, and 50% on tourism. I mean, I drove from Hamilton to Waipawa a week and a half ago for an event, and you lose signal on that state highway. Which is it? Is it 3? I mean, the Taupo Napier Road has still got lots of gaps in it.
Mm. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. It looks like we're wrapping up for the questions. We should probably let you all go get some lunch. But I just wanted to say thank you to Craig for his session today, and I hope you got a lot out of it. And to highly recommend attending the symposium. It's brilliant. They have incredible speakers on broad topics, and you can get really into the detail of stuff. So looking forward to my free ticket, Craig.
I think you spoke a couple of years ago.
Yeah, brilliant speakers.
Yes.
All right, well, thanks everyone.
Yeah.
And
Hey,
look forward to
Craig.
seeing you next
Craig.
week.
Hey, Craig, I just had one other question. Silly one, but what does CIP stand for? Is that
Crown Infrastructure Partners.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that used to be Crown Fibre Partners, and then they're doing housing and water now. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
cool.
Cool.
Hey, thanks
Thanks, Craig.
everybody.
Thank
Good
you
to
very
talk
much.
to you.
Have a good
Yeah.
Easter. Bye-bye.
Bye.